Hi, welcome. So on behalf of Humanities Tennessee, I'd like to welcome you to the Southern Festival of Books. This session, as you saw, is just a few miles south, timeless recipes from our favorite places with Ouita Michel and Sara Gibbs. If you are watching this session on Facebook Live or YouTube and would like to ask questions, please do so. We have a moderator who will be transferring the questions to us so that we can see them. And then at the end, we will have a question and answer session. So Parnassus Books is the bookseller of the Southern Festival of Books, and purchasing your books through them help keep our festival free. There will be a link to purchase books that are placed in the chat, and you can see that. And just thank you, Parnassus, for all that you do to keep our festival going. So the festival is a free nonprofit event that is supported in part by donations from individuals. If you appreciate the event and would like to support it, you can do so in the app or by visiting the website at www.humtn.org. All right, so to introduce our guest today, Ouita Michel is a 6-time James Beard Foundation Award nominee, including nominations for Outstanding Restaurateur and Best Chef Southeast. Michel and her restaurants are regularly featured in local and national media, such as the New York Times, Southern Living, Garden and Gun, Food Network, and the Cooking Channel. She was a guest judge on Bravo's Top Chef series, and she lives in Midway, Kentucky. And then Sara Gibbs is a chef as well as a recipe writer and editor. After working as a West Virginia public librarian for 15 years, Sara moved to Kentucky to attend culinary school. After she worked in various Louisville restaurants, including Lynn's Paradise Cafe and the corporate dining room of Brown-Forman Corporation. In 2009, Sara joined Ouita Michel's restaurant family at the Woodford Reserve Distillery, and she later helped with the opening of new restaurants and with recipe developing and archiving, and she lives in Central Florida. So welcome, ladies.
Thank you.
Thank you, Darcy.
Yeah. Yes, you're welcome. Just love to hear you guys get started telling us a little bit about the cookbook.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or what you'd like to start with.
It's wonderful to see Sara. I don't get to see Sara every day, so I love it when we're together. Well, this is our first book. We had never written a cookbook before, and Sara, correct me if I'm wrong, but it took us about 6 years to write the book.
Correct.
And that was because we opened a few restaurants in between writing the book. And one thing that our process was Sara was running one of our small cafes, and every time I opened a new restaurant, and I believe we did this with Windy Corner, which is one of our sandwich shops, and Smithtown Seafood. We would work on the menu together, and I would be the whirling dervish and create the menu, and then Sara would come along behind me and write the recipes out carefully for the staff in the restaurants. And that was her role, really. She eventually just moved into that role full time and went from restaurant to restaurant and did it for Windy Corner and Smithtown Seafood, and then again for Wallace Station and the bakery. And so really working on codifying the restaurant recipes that we prepare inside our group of restaurants. We have 7 restaurants, and we had 8. We had to close one for COVID. And when Sara first started with us, we also did all the food service for Woodford Reserve Distillery, but COVID disrupted their food service program as well. So we have closed that part of our business down as well. But in creating those restaurant cookbooks, and by restaurant cookbook, I mean, if you go into their kitchen at any of these restaurants, you'll see a big binder of all of their recipes. It was Sara who really created those, because I was not a believer in recipes until I met Sara.
And I went around to all the restaurants often enough that if I saw their notebooks weren't dirty or splattered with things, that meant they weren't using the recipes and they were in trouble.
Well, then she'd call me up and she'd say, I don't think, or she'd call me and say, do you remember they took egg out of the tartar sauce at Windy Corner? She's like, I think there's a chef, he's still with us, that he decided he wanted to make his version of the tartar sauce, but I didn't want, so she would be like, I don't think they're using their cookbook, or I see a huge amount of alterations in the cookbook, or
Too many notes in the margin.
well, and her, I think the thing that makes us a good team is that, and we've done this. We even did this for not a restaurant that in our group, but restaurants that are outside of our group. There was one restaurant outside of our group that we helped sort of brainstorm a menu around and write recipes for. But we make a good team because Sara is extremely research and detail oriented, and I am always in a spin, about I'm always, oh, what are we going to do next? I'm trying to change. But so she really helps focus our work. So we started there. That's where we started. We were two chefs working together. We opened several restaurants, and our group expanded. In that expansion process, Sara played this instrumental role in writing the commercial recipes for each restaurant kitchen. And along the way, I can't even remember. Why did we start thinking about our cookbooks, Sara? Because of the restaurant cookbooks?
Well, so many people, we were always getting requests for recipes.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Then they started to fall into the same categories like that. And then you started realizing that we had what we were calling silver bullets.
Oh, yeah.
They were the best of from all the restaurants, because all the restaurants had completely different menus and completely different personalities. This isn't a company where it's a cookie cutter approach. They're all very different. And yet, so we started getting requests for these same recipes over and over. And we finally just decided that it would be a good idea to put them together in a collection.
Well, and then, we started getting requests for recipes from media. Remember, and I would say, well, and one of the things that I learned from Sara was that when you release a recipe to the public for media, you want to make sure that it's a recipe somebody can create in their home kitchen with a great deal of success. And if they can't, then it's not really a good recipe. So she started informally taking, there'd be a media call for, I don't know, holiday Thanksgiving side dishes or something like that. And that's a big way that chefs that own restaurants promote their restaurants, right? We want to make sure that we're being, accessible to media. And so Sara would test the recipes and get them ready for release.
Yeah, so by the time we started, we had quite a few already done for that reason.
And it took a long time as I feel like it took us a long time, the two of us, working on the structure of the cookbook. Like the table of contents, that took almost a year. I feel like that we struggled with how to organize the book. We knew because one of the things about our group of restaurants is that we have a couple of missions, but one of our missions is to increase farm income in Kentucky. So we're farm to table. Each restaurant, although it's very different, strives to use as many Kentucky raised ingredients as possible. So we were struggling with whether or not we should organize the book according to season, according to menu item, and what stories we should tell. Like, are we going to focus just on one restaurant? Are we going to focus on multiple restaurants? So getting that table of contents done, I felt like really gave us a lot of focus, and that pushed us forward quite a bit. And the other thing that we really wanted to use as an inspiration was the many, many community cookbooks that people find in their own towns, in their own charitable organizations, and women's auxiliaries. And, you can find a cookbook in every church in small town in Kentucky. I think in Midway we have like 13 churches, and each one has a cookbook. And I know Sara has a huge collection of those, and I do too. But Sara, what was that one cookbook? Was Southern Foodways Alliance?
Yeah.
I think it was the Community Cookbook.
Community Alliance, I think. I don't know.
It was the SFA cookbook, and that was very inspirational because they had a ring binder, remember? And
yeah, we really liked the format and the folk art that they used in it. And it reminds me, didn't you have some of the recipes from Wallace Station when they first opened? They were from some of those community cookbooks, weren't they?
Oh
Like
yeah.
the olive nut spread. And so a lot of the spreads came from the cookbook in Midway.
Yeah, there's an old one of the older churches, which it happens to be my church, is Midway Christian Church, and they had cookbooks that went back probably about 100 years. And every recipe in those cookbooks, which is one thing that's very nice, is, the provenance is there. So it's Betty Ann Voigt's recipe for olive nut spread, or it's, so and so's recipe for beaten biscuits or something like that. And they are all attributed to the person that put them in the book. And when we went to start writing the recipes or writing the menus for the bakery and for Wallace Station, we wanted to make sure that we're using the recipes from the community. Big part of our philosophy is that small restaurants in rural areas, and we have 4 in a rural area around Lexington, Kentucky, can really drive a sense of community and communicate a sense of community, keep it from being lost, and that we should be expressing the community. As a restaurant in our community, we wanted to express the food traditions and the food ways of that community. So sometimes people open restaurants and everything on the menu comes in pre-prepared, and it's dropped in a fryer, or it's heated and served. In these little restaurants that we own, everything is made from scratch. So that was actually good resource material for the cookbook, though.
And Ouita's always so good to credit her staff with the recipes. A lot of times chefs will take credit for what has been developed on their time by their staff. But so that's why so many of the recipes in the book are named for the person on the staff who created it. And a lot of those people are still in the company. Most of them are.
Yeah. Well, and I do want to say this was one thing that we learned. This is something that I really did not appreciate the copy editor on. So I wrote a lot of the narrative in the book, and Sara really focused on writing these recipes, bringing them down, scaling them down, testing them, writing the instructions very specifically so that people could create them in their own home. And that was Sara's role. And in my role, writing the narrative, I like to think in terms of the we and not the I, because everything that I do is in conjunction or collaboration with another person, or many times multiple people. And the copy editor, when we got the finals of the book to the copy editor, would not accept that. So I will say, every time you see the word I in that cookbook, that was not me who wrote it that way. That was some editor who didn't understand what we were trying to communicate and changed it because grammatically that editor felt like it should be changed. So I totally disagree with it. And the next time I write a book, I will insist that it not be changed. That was my one pet peeve about writing the book. And it's a process I'm not familiar with because I'm a chef, not a writer. And so I didn't exactly know how to stand up for my own voice. But I really don't speak in I terms. And that was why we also wanted the community cookbook as an inspiration, because this restaurant group is a community. Each restaurant is its own community. We're a community of chefs. We're a community of co-workers, of farmers, of customers. And so we really wanted that to inspire the stories of the book. But Sara, you need to talk about how you tested all the recipes, because that is, what makes the book so great.
Well, I was lucky because I already knew what they were supposed to taste like, because having worked in the company, I had made gallons of everything in there. So it was easy to do it by taste. And then even after I moved out of state, I was still able to do that because I had a good flavor memory. But a lot of the recipes, I went to the restaurants and stood by the cook and watched over their shoulders while they cooked and told their stories. And I always think about Steve Rose and his grandmother and his sausage gravy, because he's such a character, and he was so excited to talk about his grandmother and to show me his tricks and his tips. So I had the best job because I got to drive around in the beautiful Bluegrass and go and see these creative and talented chefs and hear their stories and watch them. And I had watched a lot of them grow up. A lot of them were kids to me. And I was with the company for 9 years. So I saw a lot of them start out at 16. And by the time I left, some of them were running kitchens. So it was a real joy.
But and some of the recipes in the book, quite a few of the recipes Sara actually came up with. So like the Bourbon Trail chili is one of we serve that in 3 different restaurants, and we serve, I don't know, hundreds of gallons a week at this point probably. But that's Sara's recipe. She originally started making that at Woodford Reserve, and that's why we call it the Bourbon Trail chili, because it was first served on the Bourbon Trail at Woodford Reserve Distillery. It was her recipe. She created it, and then she scaled it up for restaurant consumption. Then she scaled it back down for the cookbook. But I think you should tell everybody how you went about that just writing a recipe down on a piece of paper is not, and editing it does not make it appropriate for the cookbook. What the process was, the testing process that you went through for each recipe.
Well, for one thing, it's different writing for a home cook because you want to be cognizant of what size packaging the ingredients will come in. Because you know, in a kitchen, you're working with a number 10 can, which is 12 cups, like diced tomatoes for the chili. It's based on number 10 cans of beans and number 10 cans of tomatoes. So when you're asking people to make it at home, you have to figure out what can size equates to that and doesn't mess with the flavor too much. So I spent a lot of time in grocery stores or a lot of time online on the Amazon grocery site trying to see what the pack size was and then use that, because I always feel like a cookbook, you have such an intimate relationship with the cook because you're asking them to go out and spend money on something and to trust you that it's going to be good and it's going to come out right. So I took that seriously and tried hard to not make them use 1/4 cup of tomatoes out of a 16-ounce can, or anything like that. I don't like having things left over in my refrigerator, so I certainly don't want other people to have half of a stick of cream cheese left over. It's just, I don't think that's a wise way to write a recipe. So I did my best to make it easy for the person shopping and cooking to buy the ingredients, use them properly, and to come out with a good result. And I was telling Ouita earlier that I read a review of our cookbook on Amazon, and it was someone from the Lexington area who had been to a lot of the restaurants and eaten the food, so she had her own food memory, and so she knew what they were supposed to taste like. And so she talked about making them and what she'd made and how they came out well. And the thing that she talked about particularly was the bread recipe for Wallace Station and how it was a different method that she'd never used before. And usually she wouldn't try that. She would stick to what she knew. But this time she trusted us and she used the recipe exactly. And it came out, and she said it in capital letters, perfect every time. So that was such a good review for me, better than Publishers Weekly or Kirkus or anything else. For my part, that means that I did the right thing.
Yeah. Well, I want to emphasize too that not only did Sara spend all that research time in the list of ingredients and making sure that they made sense for the home cook, but once she had the recipe where she wanted it, she sent it out to 4 different people, Sara?
Yeah, it depended upon how complicated it was or how irritated I was by it that I couldn't get it right. Lemon bars, that went out to a lot of people because getting that salty, sweet, acid combination to be just right, it was, and scaling it down from a pan that had no relationship to any pan that you have in your home kitchen. Yeah, that was challenging.
So she would send it out. You'd send it out to 4 people, and they would make the recipe in their home kitchen, write comments, and send them back to Sara. And many times this happened like on a few times, like for example with the lemon bars, like more than one round, like several rounds. So that was a long and very intensive testing process involving multiple people in multiple areas in multiple home kitchens, all writing comments back, so that the recipe was adjusted and adjusted and adjusted. And so, but it's so gratifying. I know exactly how you feel, Sara, because when I see on social media somebody taking a picture of their quiche that they made, and it's wonderful. And we have in our hopes that this cookbook really gets used by multiple generations in each family, because there are a lot of recipes in here that kids can really make well, like sloppy joes and chili and um, olive nut, or the different pimento cheese. So it's a great cookbook for young cooks and as well as older cooks. The tuna salad is really good. That's Silas's favorite, and he wrote our forward, and he makes that tuna salad all the time, which I totally love. That we have a recipe in our cookbook that a famous Southern author, likes to eat and cook. That makes me really, really happy. But a big part of this book that we wanted to talk about too was our illustrator, Brenna Flannery, and the book is beautifully illustrated. Um, and the illustrations were done it was a first time illustrator. She has never illustrated a book previous to this, and she is a tattoo artist. And I was going to show everybody. I showed Darcy and Sara earlier. I have I'll do horizontal. It's hard to see it, but it's actually
There, that's good.
there's a dandelion tattoo. And if you look in the book, on the page across, she did a portrait of each one of us, Sara, myself, and our co-author, Jeannie Graff, who is our editor. And across from my portrait is the companion dandelion to my tattoo. And I chose a dandelion for my COVID tattoo because they're edible. They're beautiful. I love the color yellow. They are durable. They're persistent. You can't kill them. And when they go to seed, you get to make a wish. And when my daughter was a little girl, about 4 or 5 years old, I have this picture on my phone. It's my screensaver of her all scrunched up, blowing the seeds of her dandelion out. So I've always loved dandelions. But the neat thing, too, about what Brenna's illustrations bring is that going back to that community cookbook idea, I probably have about 500 Central Kentucky community cookbooks, the ones with the spiral plastic binding on them. And we were going through those, and there are all those little icons in those books. There'll be like a little bowl with eggs on the side, or there'll be a little loaf of bread for the bread chapter. There are all these little food icons. You almost don't notice them when you're reading the book because they're very small drawings. Probably they were the version of the 1950s, 60s, 70s clip art that we all take for granted now. But so Brenna took that as an idea. And then Sara had also remembered that the Silver Palette cookbook, which is one of my favorite cookbooks, has all line drawings in it. So I don't know if any of you have that book or have remembrances of that book, but it's got a lot of great drawings in it as well. So Brenda took a look at that. And then we also looked at Moosewood cookbook, which is also a beautifully illustrated cookbook. So she really, I think she's very young. She's, I don't know, she's probably only about 26 years old right now. She's actually pregnant with twins. She's expecting twins in December. So she took a very modern approach, and I think did a beautiful job of merging her tattoo design aesthetic with these old community cookbooks and coming up with something that's really new and really different and hopefully very appealing to young generations. So there's this book of a lot of very old-fashioned sort of nostalgic recipes inside a wrapper that's very modern and up to date and interesting for younger people. So that made me very happy too.
And I think we should say, when we first got the proofs back, the drawings were small, like they would be in these community cookbooks. But Ouita and I we wanted them big. We wanted them to have their own presence. And like Ouita said, she wanted it to look more like a graphic novel. So she wanted the illustrations to be a huge part of the book, and that to smack you in the face when you open them up. So we kept going back and forth with the editors about making them bigger. And we sent them a document page by page, and on every one it said bigger, bigger, bigger. But we got there, and after the illustrator, after the person put it together, it really does get where we wanted it to be, and it became unique, and I think it really fits the personality of who we are.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Well, I think the other part of the interesting part of writing the book, and correct me, jump in, Sarah, with how you felt about it, but the whole editing process was very interesting. Like, I guess I kind of thought we would give them I didn't realize how specific you need to be in the translation for your publisher. Do you know what I mean? Like the whole step-by-step thing we went through with the illustrations, the copy editing. Like I didn't expect changes. I don't know, because I'm used to people just doing exactly what I tell them to do.
Well, and we were hampered by the fact that we were doing it during COVID, and so we couldn't really sit down together, and we were trying to do everything remotely. And normally we would have gone into a meeting with a stack of books of the things that we like to say.
Oh,
this is what we like, and this is what we like about it. So we had to try to convey what we wanted virtually, and it was a little difficult. And I guess none of us expected to spend as much time on it in the editing process as we ended up. I guess you just thought you would turn it in and that was it. But it was months of rereading and looking at numerous versions and commenting. Yeah, we learned a lot, I will say. We learned a whole lot.
And Jeannie, we did. Yeah. And Jeannie and Sara, Jeannie Graff is our co-author, and she's not on this panel today. But without Jeannie, there's no doubt in my mind we would not have gotten the book done. And so, because all of this, the day that I met with Ashley Runyon from the UK Press was the day they shut dining rooms down because of COVID-19 in Kentucky. And so, honestly, for the last year and a half, I've just been in a constant pivot with 7 restaurants, just working our way in and out and around COVID-19. And so Jeannie and Sara had to handle almost all of the editorial work. The only thing that I did was there at the end around the illustrations and say, we have to go bigger, we have to go broader. But it was really their efforts with the edits. And I do want to make one other point, though, that this book is a project of the University Press at Kentucky. We've loved working with. And it's a Fireside Industries project, which means that a portion of the sales of this book goes to support the Heinemann Settlement School. And that organization is very near and dear to my heart. It's in Heinemann, Kentucky, and they are dedicated to literacy. They have big dyslexia programs for the children of the mountains. They were the first public school in Knott County in Kentucky, and they are no longer a public school, but they are dedicated to improving the lives of the citizens around them through literacy, through arts literacy, and through foodways. So they have a processing teaching kitchen, and they work hand in glove with feeding Appalachia and growing Appalachia. And so it's really been a wonderful thing to be able to have our book go to the benefit of the Heinemann Settlement School as well.
Is that where you met Silas?
That is where I met Silas. The Heinemann Settlement School is home to the Appalachian Writers Workshop, and the Fireside Industries was a brainchild of Rebecca Gail Howell, who is a wonderful poet and a friend of mine, and she really encouraged me to get involved in writing, and helped me when I was stuck and encouraged me a lot in writing. And so it's just neat. Yes, that's where I met Silas. And it's a wonderful organization.
Well, I have a question for you. I kind of want to circle back to where you were just talking about how local ingredients are important and supporting the local Kentucky farming community and just the community at large. What inspired that as to be your mission? What kind of shaped that mission for you?
Well, I think, a lot of young chefs, and myself included, I grew up in Kentucky, but I went to New York for training and worked in New York City for some years. And when I came back, I, worked in Lexington for a while. And 20 years ago, we opened our first restaurant, which is called the Holly Hill Inn in Midway, Kentucky. And that's where I live. I'm in my home right now, but I'm on a 10-acre lot right next door to our restaurant, our first restaurant. Um, and by the way, we just tore up the mortgage. We burned the mortgage last month, Sarah. So
Oh,
we own the whole thing, lock, stock, and barrel. Um, but in doing that, I think I had aspirations of I didn't really locate my cuisine in Kentucky. I think a lot of chefs think about themselves as being in big food cities, or this would have been true in maybe the 80s and 90s. I think younger chefs are much better at trying. Well, I don't know if I think they're much better. I'm worried they're too influenced by junk food, but um, I thought of my cuisine as being more continental in style. And I was listening to Bruce Springsteen give an interview to Terry Gross one time, and it was fascinating. And my stepfather had just passed, and he was a wonderful man. And he had dedicated his life really to a citizens advocacy group here in Kentucky. And Bruce Springsteen was saying how he wanted his music to reflect the quintessential American story. And he located himself in his context. And he was really specific about the way he talked about that. And I was in the parking lot at Wallace Station, and I looked around me, and Wallace Station is on a national scenic byway called Old Frankfort Pike, and it sits on 5 acres, and it has a beautiful barn. And I looked around me, and I'm like, everything I do needs to be all about Kentucky. And although I had started using local ingredients from the very beginning of our ownership of Holly Hill Inn, and in fact, buying from local farmers was in our business plan, I hadn't really located the cuisine of what I was making or the food that I was preparing in this place of Kentucky. Um, so it was a pivotal moment for me, and that was probably it would have been maybe 10 years ago. Um, and so yes, one of the recipes in the book, we do have soup beans and cornbread and pimento cheese and Benedictine and all these recipes of our place. And we want to make sure that people don't forget that these that young people are exposed to these recipes, and that we continue on with the food ways that we have, as well as expand them. And the table is large, and we want as many people around the table as possible. But that's really how that started.
And one of your biggest efforts was in the burger program.
Oh yeah. Well, so when we started Holly Hill Inn, when we bought the restaurant, I really saw myself inside a MFK Fisher book. So I loved MFK Fisher, and so I saw myself cooking in a French chateau. My husband worked the front of the house. We met the first day of chef school, and I ran the kitchen. And but then people were saying, well, fine dining is really the prison of local food. So you can only use locally produced food in expensive restaurants because that's the only kind of restaurant that can afford to pay for a local ingredient. So we started with the idea that we would break local food out of that prison. And really, Sarah, it started with Windy Corner. Remember, we did the pulled pork hobo. We decided that Windy Corner came after Wallace Station, Windy Corner would be the a po' boy shop because we could do pulled pork, pulled chicken, pulled beef, and we could use all these alternate cuts of meat that aren't like, on a cow, on a steer. There's only so much of it that's tenderloin, strip loin, and ribeye. All the rest either has to be ground or braised. And so we did that, and we also started hamburgers, and we started all of our hamburgers come from Stonecross Farms, which is a farm owned by Patrick Kennedy here in Kentucky, and we sell more than 100,000 burgers. I want to say my numbers are going to be slightly skewed because of COVID, but probably close to 200,000 burgers, and that doesn't count what we use for meatloaf and chili and all that kind of thing. We wanted to use enough hamburger that we would support all the steak that we consume in sort of the higher end restaurants that we have. And yeah, I think we've purchased we're probably edging toward $4 million at this point in Kentucky farm goods. And that's good. That makes me feel good.
It should. That's amazing.
It is special, for sure.
As a result, does the community really embrace your restaurants?
Oh, they do. They've supported us like in incredible ways throughout this last year and a half. It's been a difficult time. Actually this year is much more stressful than last year. There's a lot of business to be done, but there's such acute labor shortages that I'm back where I started at the stoves at Holly Hill Inn. So I spent the last week at the saute station, writing the menu and running the kitchen at Holly Hill, while my culinary director ran some big events that we were doing. And it's likely where I'll be for a while. But the community came out in incredible ways and supported us like beyond my wildest expectations over the past year and a half. And it's very gratifying. Yeah, very gratifying to see
Really
and experience.
Yeah. I will see if I don't have any questions yet, but I just wanted to see if there was anyone watching on Facebook or YouTube, if they had any questions. We can keep talking and see if any of those come in, but not to talk about it. Oh, go ahead.
One of my favorite recipes that Sara has in the book, I want to talk about this just a little bit because it was from her mom, and it relates to hamburgers, and it was one of our first burgers we put on the Windy Corner menu, and it's the peanut burger. And now it's very trendy to put peanut butter on a burger. But Sara, tell the story about your mom and our peanut salad and that burger.
Yeah, that was funny. The day we were working on the menu, we were just brainstorming about ideas for burger toppings. And I said, well, I know this is really weird, but when I was growing up, my mother would put dry roasted peanuts chopped up and bound with mayonnaise on a burger with coleslaw. And she had it at a cafeteria in Cumberland, Maryland in the 40s, maybe early 50s, called Turby's. And she and her mother would go into Cumberland, and it was a big deal to go and to this lunch counter and have this hamburger. So my mother recreated it at home because it was very easy. And so it was just something we always had. It was a family, staple. So when I told her, of course, the first thing you think of is to make it spicy, make it a little bit Thai. And so I guess it was kind of a cult favorite for many years.
Yeah, it is. Well, we brought it. We brought it to the Zim's downtown location now too. So now that's where it's located. It's Mabel's Nut Burger, but I've always loved that. It's my favorite burger. I love that burger.
It sounds like an odd combination, but for some reason it really works.
Yeah, it's delicious. Really, really good.
I read that recipe and I was like, what? What? When I saw that. When you say Thai, I'm like, oh, I could see that. That would sound good. So I guess what if it's even possible, what would be your favorite recipe in the cookbook to make, or one that you feel a special tie to, if it's possible to pick out of all of these recipes?
Sara, you go first.
I know that's a hard one. I I just cooked out of it actually quite a bit for my family this weekend. And one of the things that I hadn't made for a while was the cheesecake brownie. And I had forgotten how good it was. That's a great thing about it for me, because I have all these flavor memories. So if I haven't had it for a couple of years, because I can't go down the street anymore and get it since I'm in Florida, and I have to make it myself. So when I get hungry for it, I can do that. But the cheesecake brownies are pretty spectacular, I have to say. They were enjoyed by all.
I mean, I have a bunch that I really like. I love cheese spreads. So like the spreads chapter is probably my favorite, but I really love burgoo. And that recipe is from a personal friend of mine that's in the book. And so I like the burgoo recipe. I do love making that.
Thank you. It looks like we do have a question from the audience. It is, are there any recipes you would recommend for working parents with little ones?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think we have a great meatloaf recipe in there, and we have a wonderful, the chili recipe, the soup bean recipe, the creamy chicken and mushroom recipe, all of those deliver in quantity, and they're super easy to put together. And then you've got some for the rest of the week. And that's kind of what I do a lot. I cook a lot on the weekends and then pack for the rest of the week. And then we have lunches and quick suppers when I'm working in the restaurant at night. I have, chili to heat up or something like that. So I think those are really good for kids. And also the quiche recipe is delicious in the cookbook. I think that's wonderful. Sarah, what about you? Do you have any specifics you think would be
I'd
good?
agree with all of those. The sloppy Joe.
The sloppy Joes are great.
Because none of those things are really spicy or anything. Even the chili isn't that spicy. So,
The sooner you can get your little ones hooked on pimento cheese, the better.
That's a good idea.
And don't buy your pimento cheese. It's too expensive to buy. I can't stand how expensive cheese spreads are in the grocery. They should be something that's economical to make, and they are. So just make them yourself.
Oh, and the Benedictine, I made it this weekend, and that's certainly not something I can get in Florida because it's such a uniquely Kentucky thing, and it's easy to make, but it's such a great sandwich spread, as well as dip and on and on.
And it holds up really well. It holds up forever. Thank you, Connie.
All right. Well, we have about 2 minutes left. Is there anything else that you'd like to share before we end today, or?
Well, I just like to thank the Southern Festival of Books for having us and for featuring our book. I mean, it's a thrill. I don't know about you, Sarah, but I never thought we'd be part of a book festival, and it's wonderful to see our book in such amazing company and be a part of the festivities.
It is, and I hope people will buy it and use it and enjoy it. And like Ouita says, she hopes it's the most dog-eared, slopped up cookbook in the kitchen.
And make sure when you're using this book that you write into the book all the things that you want to add, so that when you pass it on, your kids have that. Write in your cookbooks.
Well, it is a beautiful book. It is so, so pretty. And I hope that everyone watching does get to get a copy. But thank you, ladies, so much for your time today. And thank you for everyone who was able to attend. And I just want to remind you that you are able to purchase this cookbook through the link through Parnassus Book. There should be a link in the chat. And today is the last day for the book festival, but there should be 1 or 2 sessions that you can join after this. So thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.